volcano. The explosive scene shot volcanic plumes.
If the sky ever turns blood red above you, do not panic. But why did...
Only minutes ago, terrifying scenes began emerging from Turkey as a series of extreme events unfolded one after another. It started with relentless rain that soaked the mountains until the ground finally collapsed in massive landslides. Soon after, raging wildfires turned the sky dark and the sun red like blood. In another region, a rare snowstorm buried entire streets under heavy snow. Beneath the earth, a volcano erupted as nearby ocean waters suddenly grew hot. And then something even more chilling happened. The sea began to pull away from the shore. Many now fear what could come next. Stay with us to see what is really happening. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Part 1. Torrential rain and the landslide. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The rain began quietly, almost gently, and falling across the hills and valleys like countless storms before it. People in nearby towns continued their daily routines. Cars moved along narrow roads, farmers checked their fields, and families gathered inside their homes, listening to the steady tapping of raindrops against the windows. In many places, rain like this was common. No one imagined that it was the beginning of something far more dangerous. But as the hours passed, the sky slowly changed. Instead of clearing, the clouds grew darker and heavier. The entire horizon turned a deep gray, as if the sky itself had thickened. The air became strangely humid and oppressive. People stepping outside could feel the weight of the atmosphere pressing down around them. Even the wind seemed to disappear, leaving the landscape quiet and still. Then the rain intensified. What started as a steady shower turned into relentless rainfall. Water poured from the sky hour after hour, drumming on rooftops, flooding streets, and soaking the earth beneath the hillsides. Small streams began to swell, and muddy water flowed down slopes that had once been firm and stable. Days passed, and the rain did not stop. By now the ground had absorbed more water than it could hold. The soil on the mountainsides was no longer solid. It had turned soft, heavy, and unstable. Cracks began forming along the edges of slopes. In some places, trees leaned slightly as the earth beneath their roots shifted. Still, most people believed the storm would eventually pass. But late that night, something changed. Witnesses later described hearing a strange sound in the distance. A deep, low rumble that seemed to come from beneath the ground itself. At first it was faint, almost like distant thunder rolling across the mountains. Some residents stepped outside their homes, looking up at the sky, expecting lightning or another wave of heavy rain. But the sound did not come from the sky. It came from the hills. Within seconds, the rumble grew louder, turning into a terrifying roar that echoed through the valley. The soaked mountainside had finally given way. Thousands of tons of mud, rock, and debris suddenly broke loose and began rushing downhill with unstoppable force. The landslide moved fast. A massive wall of earth surged toward the village below, tearing through trees, fences, and anything else in its path. Houses stood no chance against the weight of the collapsing slope. Walls cracked. Roofs shattered. Entire structures were swallowed by thick waves of mud and debris. People ran into the streets, shouting warnings and trying to escape the approaching destruction. Some grabbed family members and rushed toward higher ground. Others could only watch in shock as the landslide thundered past, leaving chaos behind it. When the movement finally stopped, the landscape had been transformed. Homes were buried beneath layers of mud. Roads that once connected the community had vanished under piles of rock and broken trees. Vehicles were trapped where they stood, half submerged in the thick brown earth that now covered much of the village. The storm still had not ended. Rain continued to fall lightly over the disaster zone as emergency crews began arriving from nearby towns. Rescue teams worked through the darkness with flashlights and heavy equipment, digging carefully through the debris in the hope of finding survivors. Throughout the night, the sound of shovels striking mud and rock echoed through the ruined streets. Families waited nearby, praying for good news as rescuers searched beneath collapsed homes and shattered walls. But even as the community struggled to recover from the landslide, something else was beginning to happen above them. Because while the rain slowly weakened, the sky itself was starting to change again. And soon, a new and far more unsettling sign would appear above the horizon. Part 2. Wildfire and the blood-red sun. In the days that followed the devastating landslide, the rain finally began to fade. At first, people welcomed the change, and after days of relentless storms and mud-soaked hillsides, the sky slowly cleared and sunlight returned. Roads were still damaged, rescue teams were still searching through debris, and communities were trying to recover from the destruction. But at least the storm seemed to be over. However, the weather did not return to normal. Instead, a new and unsettling shift began to take place. Temperatures started to rise, gradually at first, then more noticeably. The air that had once been cool and damp from the storm turned strangely dry. The humidity disappeared almost overnight. In its place came a heavy, hot atmosphere that made the land feel parched and tense. The ground, still scarred from the landslide, began drying rapidly under the growing heat. Across nearby forests and hills, leaves curled slightly at the edges. The grass that had been soaked just days before now turned brittle beneath the rising temperature. The air carried a faint scent of dry wood and dust. Then the wind arrived. Strong gusts began sweeping across the region, rushing through valleys and pushing through dense forest. Trees swayed as the wind moved quickly through their branches. Dry leaves rattled together, creating a restless whisper that echoed through the woods. Fire experts often say that these conditions, heat, dry air, and strong wind, create the perfect environment for disaster. And soon, that warning would prove true. Somewhere deep within the forest, a small flame appeared. At first, it seemed insignificant. Perhaps it began from a spark, a lightning strike, or a moment of human carelessness. Whatever the cause, the fire started quietly, among dry brush and fallen branches. For a short moment, it remained small, flickering through the undergrowth. But the forest had already been primed for something much larger. The dry vegetation caught fire quickly. Wind rushed through the trees, feeding the growing flames with fresh oxygen. What began as a small blaze suddenly spread outward, racing across the forest floor. Within minutes, the fire was no longer small. Walls of flame climbed up tree trunks and leapt from branch to branch. Burning leaves and embers were carried through the air by powerful winds, igniting new fires far ahead of the main blaze. The fire began to move with frightening speed, consuming everything in its path. Soon, thick columns of smoke began rising high into the sky. From miles away, people could see the dark clouds of smoke spreading across the horizon. But emergency alerts began appearing across nearby towns, warning residents about the rapidly growing wildfire. Firefighters rushed toward the scene, but the flames had already grown too large to control easily. As the fire expanded, something else began to happen in the sky above. The smoke grew so dense that it started blocking the sunlight. The once bright afternoon sky slowly turned darker, covered by layers of drifting ash and smoke. But the most unsettling sight appeared when people looked toward the sun itself. Instead of shining its usual bright yellow light, the sun now appeared deep red. Through the thick smoke, the sunlight filtered into a dark crimson glow. It looked almost like a glowing ember hanging in the sky. Across the region, people stared upward in disbelief as the entire sky turned into a strange mixture of red, orange, and a dark gray. The landscape beneath it looked almost unreal. Shadows stretched across the ground beneath a sky that seemed to be burning itself. The red sun hovered above the smoky horizon, casting an eerie light over towns and forests alike. Many residents described the moment as deeply unsettling, as if the world had suddenly changed color. Meanwhile, the wildfire continued spreading. Thousands of hectares of forest were consumed by the flames. Entire sections of woodland turned into blackened fields of ash. Wildlife fled deeper into untouched areas, while thick smoke spread across nearby communities. Authorities began ordering evacuations in several towns. Families packed their belongings quickly and left their homes as emergency vehicles moved through the streets. The highways filled with cars as people drove away from the advancing fire. Some residents could only watch from a distance as flames crept closer to areas they had lived in for years. Firefighters battled the blaze day and night, working under the glowing red sky as helicopters and aircraft dropped water and fire retardant over the burning forests. But even as the fire raged across the land, another region of the country was preparing to face something completely different. Because while flames were devouring forests in one place, far away, the weather was about to shift in the opposite direction. And soon, an entirely different kind of disaster would begin to unfold. While wildfires were still burning in parts of the country under a sky stained red by smoke, another region was about to experience something completely different. So far from the flames and heat, the weather began to shift in a way that few people expected. At first, the change seemed subtle. If you believe the world still has hope and that peace can return again, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And if you are praying for these disasters to stop and for the world to return to the calm and peaceful place it once was, write Amen in the comments below. Your voice matters. Stay with us, because what happens next may reveal even more signs that the world is only beginning to understand. Part 3. Rare snowstorm buries the city. As the night storm continued, the snowfall refused to slow down. What had begun as drifting flakes had now turned into a relentless curtain of white pouring from the sky. Hour after hour, the snow kept falling, quietly but steadily transforming the entire city. By early morning, the change was impossible to ignore. A thick layer of snow had already covered rooftops across the city. Houses that once showed their familiar colors were now hidden beneath smooth blankets of white. Slanted roofs held heavy piles of snow that slowly slid downward along the edges. Chimneys poked out through the frozen layer, releasing thin streams of smoke into the cold air. From above, the city no longer looked like a collection of buildings and streets. It looked like a silent winter landscape where everything had been softened and buried beneath snow. Tree branches bent low under the growing weight. Street signs were almost completely covered. Even the shapes of parked cars had begun to disappear, slowly turning into rounded mounds beneath the drifting snow. And the storm had not stopped during the night. And as the morning hours passed, it became clear that it was far from over. Snow continued falling across the city in thick waves, carried by strong gusts of wind that pushed it across rooftops and down empty streets. In some areas, the snow had already piled high enough to cover the lower halves of doors and windows. Residents waking up that morning were met with a difficult reality. Opening the front door often meant pushing against a wall of snow. Many people had to dig their way out with shovels just to create a narrow path from their homes to the street. Each movement was slow and exhausting as the cold air bit into their faces and hands. Walking even a short distance became a challenge. Sidewalks were buried beneath uneven layers of snow and ice. Every step had to be careful to avoid slipping. Some streets were so heavily covered that it was difficult to tell where the road ended and where the sidewalk began. Cars were almost useless in these conditions. Vehicles that had been parked outside overnight were now almost completely covered. Only the tops of mirrors or the edges of windshields hinted at where they stood beneath the snow. Drivers who tried to clear their cars faced a long process of scraping ice and shoveling thick snow just to expose the doors. Even then, moving the vehicle was not guaranteed. Many roads were blocked by deep snowdrifts. Tires struggled to gain traction on the icy surface. Some cars moved only a few meters before becoming stuck again. Others were simply abandoned along the roadside, as drivers realized they could go no further. Across the city, transportation slowed to a crawl. Public buses struggled to follow their routes through narrow corridors carved into the snow. Some routes were suspended entirely because the roads had become too dangerous. Airports reported delays as runways had to be cleared repeatedly. The city was fighting a battle against the storm, and at the center of that effort were the snowplows. Large orange trucks equipped with heavy blades began moving slowly through the streets. Their metal plows pushed massive waves of snow to the sides of the roads, carving narrow channels where vehicles could pass. But the snow kept falling. Even after a street was cleared, fresh snow would quickly begin covering it again. In response, snow removal crews worked around the clock. The machines operated 24 hours a day, their engines rumbling through the quiet city. Residents could hear them long before they appeared. The deep growl of the engines echoed through neighborhoods during the night as plows pushed through the frozen streets. Bright flashing lights cut through the swirling snow, while workers continued clearing road after road. For many crews, there was no time to rest. Drivers rotated shifts while the trucks kept moving. Their goal was simple: keep the city from becoming completely paralyzed. Still, despite their efforts, large sections of the city remained buried. Schools closed. Businesses delayed opening hours. Many people were advised to stay inside their homes unless travel was absolutely necessary. Authorities warned that walking or driving could still be dangerous due to hidden ice beneath the snow. From above, the entire city looked almost frozen in time. Streets were quiet. Parks had disappeared beneath white fields. The skyline rose above a landscape that seemed untouched except for the slow movement of snowplows carving their way through the storm. But even as the city struggled with the crushing weight of snow above the ground, something else was beginning to change far below the surface. Because deep beneath the earth, pressure was slowly building. And soon, that hidden force would begin to reveal itself. Part 4. Volcanic Eruption and the Suddenly Hot Sea. For a short time, it seemed as if the disasters had finally slowed. Cities were still digging out from deep snow, forests were still smoldering after devastating fires, and communities were rebuilding after floods and landslides. But far away, along a quiet stretch of coastline, something else had already begun to stir. The first sign was almost impossible to notice. Late one evening, residents living near the shore felt a faint vibration beneath their feet. It lasted only a few seconds. Some people thought a large truck had passed nearby. Others assumed it was their imagination. But a few minutes later, it happened again. Another small tremor, rolling gently through the ground. Then another. And another. These were not the violent earthquakes that topple buildings. They were weaker, almost like quiet warnings from deep underground. But scientists monitoring seismic stations nearby quickly saw the pattern. Small earthquakes were appearing again and again beneath the same volcanic mountain overlooking the sea. The ground was shifting. Pressure was building somewhere far below the surface. Meanwhile, something strange was happening in the water. Now, fishermen who had spent their entire lives along this coastline began noticing an unusual change. When they lowered their hands into the sea or pulled up their fishing nets, the water felt warmer than it should have been. At first, the difference was subtle. But over the next few hours, the warmth became impossible to ignore. The ocean near the shore was heating up. Some people even reported seeing thin wisps of steam drifting above parts of the water early in the morning, when the cool air made the heat more visible. It looked as though the ocean itself was quietly exhaling. The explanation was hidden beneath the seabed. Deep below the ocean floor, magma was rising. The molten rock was pushing upward through cracks in the earth, heating the surrounding water and releasing gases that escaped toward the surface. Still, life along the coast continued normally. Boats left the harbor. Fishermen prepared their nets. Tourists walked along the beach, unaware that the mountain behind them was slowly waking up. Then it happened. Without warning, the silence shattered. A violent explosion erupted from the volcano, sending a massive column of ash and smoke blasting into the sky. The ground shook hard enough for people to stumble. Windows rattled in nearby towns as the sound of the eruption rolled across the coastline like thunder. Within seconds, the sky above the mountain darkened. Thick clouds of volcanic ash rose rapidly, spreading outward as they climbed thousands of meters into the atmosphere. From miles away, the eruption looked like a giant dark tower growing above the earth. But the danger did not stop there. See, glowing rivers of lava soon appeared along the slopes of the volcano. The molten rock moved slowly but relentlessly, carving bright orange paths down the mountainside. Trees ignited instantly as the lava touched them, sending flames and smoke into the air. The eruption had fully begun. Ash began falling across nearby villages like gray snow, covering rooftops, cars, and roads. The air became heavy with fine volcanic dust, forcing many residents to wear masks or stay indoors. Yet along the coastline, the ocean was reacting in a disturbing way. As the volcanic heat intensified beneath the seabed, the water temperature near the shore began rising rapidly. Bubbles of gas burst through the surface, and the sea looked strangely agitated. Soon, marine life began appearing where it normally would not. Fish surfaced in large numbers, with swimming frantically or floating weakly in the warming water. Some species tried to escape deeper into the ocean, while others remained trapped near the shore. Even larger sea creatures were seen moving away from the coastline. For local fishermen, the sight was deeply unsettling. The ocean, that had always been a source of life and stability, now looked unstable, almost as if it were boiling from below. Above them, the ash cloud continued expanding. Air traffic controllers quickly issued urgent alerts to aircraft in the region. Volcanic ash can damage airplane engines and block visibility for pilots. Flights were rerouted, delayed, or canceled entirely as the massive ash plume spread across the sky. Airports hundreds of kilometers away began adjusting schedules as the cloud drifted through major flight paths. From the ground, the eruption looked like something from another world. A dark sky filled with ash, a glowing volcano pouring rivers of fire down its slopes, and an ocean that was slowly heating and churning along the coastline. But despite the terrifying spectacle, scientists watching the situation were becoming concerned about something even bigger. Because sometimes, when the sea begins behaving this way near an erupting volcano, it can signal something far more destructive about to happen. And if their fears were correct, the most frightening event had not happened yet. Part 5. The ocean suddenly retreats. In the hours after the volcanic eruption, the coastline remained tense and uneasy. Ash still drifted through the sky, and the distant mountain continued releasing smoke into the air. The ocean, which had already been behaving strangely, appeared restless along the shoreline. But then something happened that no one expected. Slowly, almost quietly at first, the sea began to move away from the land. People standing near the beach noticed that the waterline looked different. Waves that normally rolled onto the sand seemed to stop farther and farther from the shore. At first, it appeared to be a normal change in the tide, but within minutes, the ocean continued pulling back, and it didn't stop. The water retreated farther out into the distance, exposing parts of the seabed that had not been seen for years. Wet sand stretched across areas that were usually underwater. Dark rocks began to appear along the newly exposed ground, followed by patches of coral and seaweed. The shoreline had suddenly expanded. Where waves had once crashed, there was now open ground. People watched in confusion as the ocean continued withdrawing. Boats that had been floating near the harbor slowly sank into the sand as the water disappeared beneath them. Fishing nets and wooden posts that had always been submerged were now visible. Even more surprising were the creatures left behind. Fish flopped helplessly across the wet sand. Small crabs scrambled over exposed rocks. Shellfish and sea creatures that normally lived beneath the waves were now scattered across the beach. For many people nearby, curiosity quickly replaced concern. Residents began walking farther out onto the newly exposed seabed, amazed by the unusual sight. Some carried buckets or bags as they moved across the wet sand, collecting fish that had been stranded by the retreating water. Children ran across the beach, pointing at the trapped sea life. But some people even used their phones to record the strange event, laughing and sharing videos as the ocean continued pulling away from the land. It looked almost like a gift from the sea. But experts watching the situation felt something very different. Oceanographers and disaster specialists have studied this exact phenomenon many times before. And when they see the sea suddenly withdraw like this, they immediately recognize the warning. Because when the ocean retreats rapidly from the coastline, it often means only one thing. A massive amount of water is being pulled away from shore. And when that water returns, it returns with unstoppable force. Far out on the horizon, the ocean's surface began to change. At first it looked like a dark line stretching across the distant water. But slowly, that line began to grow larger and taller. And within moments, it became clear that it was not a normal wave. It was something far bigger. A towering wall of water was racing toward the coast. The tsunami had formed. Moving at tremendous speed, the massive wave surged across the open sea, growing more powerful as it approached the shoreline. From the beach, people began noticing the approaching wall of water rising higher and higher above the horizon. What had seemed like an empty ocean minutes earlier was now rushing back toward land. Suddenly, panic spread across the beach. People who had walked far onto the exposed seabed realized the danger too late. Shouts and warnings echoed across the sand as people dropped their bags and ran desperately back toward the shore. But the wave was already too close. Within seconds, Yet the massive wall of water crashed onto the coastline with overwhelming force. The tsunami slammed into the beach, sweeping away everything in its path. Boats, debris, and vehicles were lifted and carried inland by the powerful surge. The water rushed through streets and buildings as if the land itself had become part of the ocean. Houses were torn from their foundations. Roads disappeared beneath the violent flood. Cars were thrown against walls and trees as the surge pushed deeper into the city. Entire neighborhoods were quickly submerged. People struggled to escape the rushing water, climbing onto rooftops or higher ground as the powerful currents swept through the streets. Emergency sirens sounded across the region, but for many areas the warning came too late. The ocean had returned with terrifying power. When the first wave finally began to slow, the destruction it left behind was staggering. Streets were buried beneath mud and debris. Buildings stood damaged or collapsed. Entire sections of the coastline had been transformed by the force of the water. Rescue teams rushed toward flooded areas, searching for survivors among the wreckage. But for many experts watching these events unfold, one disturbing thought remained. Because when disasters begin appearing in this pattern, storms, fires, extreme weather, volcanic eruptions, and now the sea itself rising against the land, it raises a chilling question. Is this simply a series of separate natural disasters? Or is the planet sending a warning that humanity is only beginning to understand? Final reflection. When we look at each of these events separately, there are explanations that science can offer. Heavy rain can trigger landslides when the soil becomes saturated and unstable. Wildfires can spread rapidly during periods of extreme heat, dry air, and strong wind. Snowstorms can bury entire cities when cold air systems collide with moisture in the atmosphere. Volcanoes erupt when pressure builds beneath the Earth's crust, and tsunamis can form when powerful disturbances move the ocean with incredible force. None of these events are impossible on their own. In fact, every one of them has happened somewhere in the world before. But what unsettles many people is when these events appear close together, when they seem to unfold in a sequence that feels larger than coincidence. First, the sky changes. Rain falls harder and longer than expected, in turning quiet hillsides into dangerous slopes ready to collapse. Landslides suddenly bury homes and roads beneath walls of mud and rock. Then the air turns dry and hot. Forests ignite, and flames spread across the land, while the sun glows deep red behind thick smoke. Entire landscapes are transformed into fields of ash. In another region, the opposite extreme appears. Temperatures plunge, and a rare snowstorm blankets a city beneath heavy layers of ice and snow. Streets fall silent as vehicles disappear beneath frozen drifts, and the world slows to a standstill. Meanwhile, beneath the surface of the Earth, something begins to stir. A volcano awakens, sending fire and ash into the sky, while the ocean near its base heats and churns. The sea itself reacts as if responding to the pressure rising from deep within the planet. And then comes, perhaps, the most frightening moment of all. The ocean pulls away from the shore, exposing the seabed and leaving fish stranded on the sand. To some, it looks fascinating, but experts know what it often means. Moments later, the sea returns as a towering wall of water. A tsunami. When people see events like these happen within the same period of time, it naturally raises questions. Because suddenly, it is not only the sky reacting, it is not only the land shifting, it is not only the ocean moving, it is all of them at once: sky, earth, and sea. Throughout history, our planet has always been capable of powerful and destructive forces. Earthquakes, storms, volcanic eruptions, and massive waves are part of the natural systems that shape the world we live in. Yet when these forces appear to rise together, the many begin to wonder whether something larger is unfolding. Is this simply a series of rare natural events that happen from time to time? Or could it be a sign that our planet is entering a more unstable and unpredictable period? Scientists continue to study these events carefully, searching for patterns in climate, tectonic movement, and ocean behavior. Their goal is to understand what may be driving these powerful reactions from nature. But for many people watching these disasters unfold, the feeling goes beyond science alone. It becomes a deeper question about the balance between humanity and the natural world. Are these events warnings, coincidences, or reminders of just how powerful the planet we live on truly is? That question is still open, and the answer may only become clearer as the world continues to watch what happens next. If you found this story interesting, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think these events mean?
Municipal.
What if the strange events happening in Turkey right now are not random disasters, but signs that something far bigger is unfolding? In recent days, violent hailstorms have suddenly turned into powerful storms filled with thunder and lightning, before floods swallowed entire streets. Insects have appeared in massive swarms, fish have fallen from the sky, and large numbers of fish have washed onto the shore. At an ancient place once called the Gate of Hell, birds mysteriously die when flying over it. Some witnesses even report strange lights appearing before earthquakes. Could these events be connected to ancient prophecy? If this topic interests you, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. It began in the middle of winter, a season when people normally expect cold winds, gray skies, and occasional snow. But on that day in Turkey, the sky delivered something very different. The clouds had been gathering for hours, stretching across the horizon like a heavy blanket. The air felt unusually still, almost tense, as if the atmosphere itself was waiting. Then suddenly, small pieces of ice began falling. At first, people thought it might simply turn into snow. But within minutes, the frozen pellets grew larger and heavier. What started as a few scattered pieces of ice quickly turned into a violent hailstorm. Large hailstones began crashing down from the sky. They slammed against rooftops, shattered car windshields, and bounced violently across the streets. The sound of ice, striking metal, echoed through neighborhoods as people rushed for shelter. Some residents filmed the storm from their windows, capturing the strange moment when winter skies began dropping chunks of ice instead of snow. For many, the storm felt unusual. Hailstorms are typically associated with powerful summer thunderstorms, when warm air rises rapidly and creates unstable conditions in the atmosphere. Seeing large hailstones falling during the winter season felt strange and unexpected. It looked like the sky was throwing stones at us, one resident said while recording the storm on his phone. "I've lived here for years and never seen hail like this in the middle of winter." But the hail was only the beginning. As the storm slowly weakened, the sky did not clear. Instead, the clouds above grew darker and thicker, spreading across the horizon like a growing shadow. The wind began to rise, pushing through the streets and bending trees under its force. Branches rattled. Street signs shook. Within minutes, what began as a strange winter hailstorm began transforming into something far more powerful. A massive storm system was forming. The air became heavier, and the sky darkened to an almost unnatural shade of gray. People looked upward, sensing that the storm had not yet reached its peak. Then came the lightning. At first, it appeared as distant flashes behind the clouds. But soon, the lightning bolts became brighter, sharper, and much closer. Brilliant streaks of light ripped across the sky, followed by thunder that rolled across the land like a distant explosion. One powerful strike hit a large tree near the edge of a road. Witnesses said the lightning exploded into the trunk with a deafening crack. In seconds, the massive tree split apart, and its roots were torn from the ground, leaving it collapsed across the street. The thunder was so loud it shook the windows, another resident said in a video shared online. When the lightning hit that tree, it felt like the ground jumped. Lightning continued flashing across the sky again and again, illuminating the storm clouds in blinding bursts of light. To many watching the scene unfold, the storm felt overwhelming, almost ancient in its power. In the Bible, storms and thunder are often described as signs of immense power in the heavens. One passage from the Book of Psalms describes a similar moment of nature's force. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. Psalm 29:4-5. As thunder rolled across the sky and lightning split the clouds, some observers said the words felt strangely fitting. What had begun as an unusual winter hailstorm had now grown into a violent storm, filled with thunder and lightning, powerful enough to split trees and shake the land. And for many people watching the sky that day, it felt like the first signal that something larger might be unfolding, a warning written not in words, but across the storm-filled heavens. After the violent storm and lightning had passed, many people hoped the worst was over. The thunder slowly faded into the distance, and the sky seemed to calm for a brief moment. But the rain did not stop. Instead, it continued. Hour after hour, heavy rain poured down across large parts of the region. What began as a powerful storm slowly turned into days of relentless rainfall. The clouds remained thick and dark, blocking the sun while sheets of water fell without pause. At first, the streets simply looked wet, but as the hours passed, the drainage systems began to struggle under the constant flow of water. Sewers filled faster than they could empty. Small puddles turned into large pools, and soon the water had nowhere left to go. Then the flooding began. Roads that once carried traffic across the city slowly disappeared beneath rising water. In many places, streets turned into rivers. Cars became trapped as engines stalled in deep water, and drivers were forced to abandon their vehicles and search for higher ground. Videos began circulating online, showing entire intersections submerged, with water flowing rapidly through the streets, like a moving current. In some neighborhoods, the floodwaters spread quickly through residential areas. People rushed to move furniture and belongings to higher floors as water began entering their homes. In low-lying districts, the rising water climbed past doors and windows within hours. By the next day, some homes were already half submerged. In rural areas outside the cities, the situation was even more devastating. Fields that had once held crops were now completely underwater. Farmers watched helplessly as entire sections of farmland disappeared beneath muddy floodwater. Wheat fields, vegetable crops, and newly planted harvests were ruined in a matter of hours. Livestock were also caught in the disaster. Many farmers struggled to move animals to safety as the water rose rapidly across their land. Some barns were flooded before people had time to react. Chickens, sheep, and cattle were left trapped in rising water, while desperate farmers tried to guide as many animals as possible to higher ground. It all happened so fast, one farmer said in a local interview. The rain didn't stop for days. By the time we realized how bad it was getting, the water was already everywhere. As the rain continued into the following days, the floods grew even worse. In several villages, the water rose so high that it reached the rooftops of smaller homes. Entire streets vanished beneath brown floodwater. Only the tops of buildings and trees could be seen rising above the surface. Families climbed onto roofs, waiting and hoping for rescue. For some people trapped in flooded areas, the situation became increasingly desperate. Because the floods had arrived so quickly, many households had not prepared enough food or supplies. Some families were forced to wait several days before rescue teams could reach them. "We had almost nothing left to eat," one resident said after being rescued. "We stayed on the roof for 2 days with the children. The water was everywhere. All we could do was wait." Rescue teams worked tirelessly, navigating flooded neighborhoods with boats to reach stranded residents. In many places, emergency workers carried elderly people and children through deep water, while delivering food and clean drinking water to those still trapped. The scale of the flooding shocked many observers. What began as a storm in the sky had now become a disaster on the ground, affecting homes, farms, animals, and entire communities. In the Bible, overwhelming floods are sometimes described as moments when nature's power reminds humanity of its fragility. One passage from the Gospel of Matthew speaks about the destructive force of storms and rising water. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Matthew 7:25. For many people watching the floodwaters rise around them, the words felt painfully real. The rain had come down, the waters had risen, and now entire communities were struggling to survive the aftermath. What had begun with strange storms in the sky had now spread across the land itself. The disaster was no longer distant thunder or flashes of lightning above the clouds. It had reached the streets, the homes, and the lives of ordinary people. For a short time after the floods began to recede, the region fell into an uneasy calm. The rain finally weakened. The floodwaters slowly pulled back from the streets, leaving behind thick layers of mud, debris, and damaged homes. People stepped outside to assess the destruction. Farmers walked through ruined fields. Families cleaned mud from their houses, hoping life might slowly return to normal. But just as the land began drying, something unexpected began to happen. At first, it was only a few insects. Small swarms appeared around streetlights and near standing pools of water left behind by the floods. Many people assumed it was a normal result of the humid conditions after heavy rain. But the numbers kept growing. Within days, the insects began appearing in massive clouds. Millions of them gathered around buildings, farms, and open fields. They covered walls, vehicles, and windows. In some places, the air itself seemed to shimmer as swarms moved through the sky like living shadows. Residents filmed the strange sight as the insects spread across entire neighborhoods. "It was like the air was alive," one local resident said. "You could hear them everywhere." We had never seen anything like it before. The sudden explosion of insect activity left many people confused. Some experts explained that floods can create perfect breeding conditions for certain insects. Warm temperatures and standing water can lead to rapid population growth, but to many residents, the timing felt unsettling. The floods had barely ended, and now another strange phenomenon had appeared. And then something even more surprising happened. Along parts of the coastline, fishermen began reporting a disturbing sight. Large numbers of fish were washing up along the shore. At first, it was only scattered fish along the beaches. But soon, the numbers grew larger. Entire sections of coastline became covered with fish, lying motionless in the sand. Local fishermen quickly reported the situation to authorities. Some feared the fish deaths might be caused by pollution or sudden changes in the water. Officials were eventually called in to help clear the beaches as the number of dead fish continued to increase. "We went out early in the morning like we always do," one fisherman said. "But instead of catching fish, we found them already dead along the shore. There were so many, we couldn't even count them." Boats moved slowly along the coastline while workers began removing the fish from the beaches to prevent further contamination. Scientists suggested several possible explanations, including sudden temperature shifts in the water or low oxygen levels caused by environmental changes after the storms. But to many residents who had just survived days of violent weather and floods, the situation felt deeply unsettling. First, the sky had turned violent. Then the land was covered with water. Now the insects had filled the air, and the fish were dying along the shores. It seemed as if the natural balance of the region had been disrupted. In the Bible, moments when nature behaves in unusual ways are sometimes described as signs that the natural order itself has been disturbed. In the book of Exodus, a series of strange events involving animals and insects once struck the land of Egypt. All the dust throughout the land of Egypt became gnats. Exodus 8:17. For some observers, the sudden swarms of insects and the mysterious death of fish felt like echoes of ancient stories describing nature in turmoil. Whether coincidence or consequence of environmental change, the events left many people with an uneasy feeling. The storms had passed, the floods had begun to fade, but something still felt wrong. "It's strange," one resident said quietly while looking at the swarms of insects near his home. "We thought everything would calm down after the floods, but now these things are happening." No one could say for certain what the strange signs meant. And that uncertainty created a growing question in the minds of many people across the region. Were these events simply the after-effects of powerful storms? Or were they only the beginning of something much larger still unfolding? If you want to see the next signs that may still be coming, make sure to hit the like button and keep watching. Weeks after the storms and floods had shaken the region, many people believed the worst had finally passed. The skies had calmed, the waters were slowly retreating, and life was beginning to rebuild itself piece by piece. But then another strange discovery began spreading among local residents. This time, it was not the sky or the sea that caught people's attention. It was a place from ancient history. In a region long known for its ruins and ancient landmarks, there exists a mysterious site that locals have spoken about for generations. The place has carried an unsettling name for centuries, the Gate of Hell. The site was known even in ancient times. Historians recorded that people once believed it was an entrance to the underworld. According to ancient accounts, animals that wandered too close to the opening would suddenly collapse and die. For many years, the story was treated as a legend. But in modern times, scientists studying the site discovered something surprising. Hidden within the ground near the ruins are natural vents releasing toxic gases from deep underground. These gases, especially carbon dioxide, can collect in low areas near the surface. When concentrations become high enough, small animals that enter the area can quickly suffocate. Birds flying too low over the opening may also be affected. It was an explanation grounded in science, yet the place still carried an eerie reputation. And recently, people say something unusual happened there again. Local residents visiting the ancient ruins began noticing birds falling from the sky near the area. At first, it was only one or two. But witnesses said several birds appeared to lose control while flying across the site, dropping suddenly to the ground. The discovery quickly spread through nearby villages. "It was strange," one visitor said after witnessing the moment. "The bird was flying normally. Then suddenly, it just dropped straight down." Some locals immediately remembered the old stories about the site. For centuries, ancient writers described the location as a deadly gateway where unseen forces rose from the earth. In fact, historians believe the ruins may correspond to the ancient site known as Plutonian, once connected to myths about the underworld. Even today, scientists acknowledge that the gas emissions in the area can still pose a danger under certain conditions. Researchers who studied the phenomenon explained that carbon dioxide can form invisible pockets close to the ground, especially during calm weather. Because the gas is heavier than air, it may remain concentrated in certain areas long enough to harm animals. But for many residents who had just witnessed weeks of strange natural events, storms, floods, swarms of insects, and fish dying along the shores, the discovery felt deeply unsettling. Now even an ancient place known for death seemed to be active again. Some observers began recalling passages from the Bible describing mysterious openings of the earth and the hidden forces beneath it. In the book of Revelation, one verse describes a symbolic moment when the earth itself reveals a dark gateway. "He opened the shaft of the abyss, and smoke rose from it like the smoke from a great furnace." Revelation 9:2. To some believers, the words felt eerily connected to the ancient site. Whether the recent bird deaths were simply caused by natural gas emissions or something more unusual, the timing left people uneasy. After weeks of strange signs in the sky, on the land, and along the sea, the appearance of another mystery at an ancient place known as the Gate of Hell only deepened the sense that something strange was unfolding. "It's hard not to wonder," one local resident said quietly. "First the storms, then the floods, then the insects and the fish, and now this place again." For centuries, the ruins had been a reminder of ancient myths and forgotten beliefs. But now, as strange events continued to appear across the region, many people began to ask a troubling question. Were these just isolated incidents? Or were modern events beginning to echo mysteries that had been written about thousands of years ago? Just when people believed the strange events might finally be ending, another mysterious sign began appearing in the sky. This time, it happened at night. In several towns, residents reported seeing unusual flashes of light above the horizon. These were not ordinary lightning storms. The sky was mostly calm, yet sudden streaks of light appeared briefly in the darkness. Some witnesses described glowing blue flashes spreading across the clouds. Others reported seeing faint purple or white lights flickering near the horizon for only a few seconds before disappearing. Videos shared online captured brief moments when the night sky suddenly lit up in strange colors. "It wasn't lightning," one resident explained. "There was no thunder, no storm. The sky just flashed blue for a moment and then went dark again." Events like this have been reported in different parts of the world before certain earthquakes. Scientists sometimes refer to them as earthquake lights, a phenomenon that remains partly mysterious even today. Some researchers believe these lights may be caused by electrical charges released when underground rocks shift under extreme pressure. But to the people witnessing the flashes, the moment felt deeply unsettling. The sky would briefly glow, and then fall silent again. In the Bible, unusual signs in the heavens are sometimes described as warnings that something significant is about to happen. One passage from the Gospel of Luke speaks about strange signs appearing in the skies. "There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars." Luke 21:25. For some observers, the strange lights felt like exactly that, a sign. And then, only a short time later, the ground began to move. At first, the movement was subtle. A faint vibration passed through the ground, barely noticeable for a moment. Some people thought it might be a heavy truck passing nearby, or strong wind rattling buildings. But within seconds, the shaking grew stronger. Windows began to rattle violently. Lamps swung from ceilings. The ground beneath people's feet started shifting with sudden force. Then the earthquake struck. Buildings trembled as the earth moved in powerful waves. Walls cracked open, and pieces of concrete began falling into the streets. In some places, entire structures could not withstand the violent motion. They collapsed. Dust clouds filled the air as buildings crumbled, sending debris crashing to the ground. People ran into the streets, shouting and searching for loved ones as the shaking continued. "It felt like the world was breaking apart," one survivor later said. "You could hear buildings cracking everywhere." For those who witnessed it, the destruction happened in seconds, yet it left behind damage that could not be easily repaired. Homes that had stood for decades were suddenly reduced to piles of broken concrete and twisted metal. Everything people had built, everything they had known, seemed to collapse in front of their eyes. And in that terrifying moment, many realized a painful truth. Some things, once destroyed, cannot simply be rebuilt the way they were before. After the storms, the floods, the strange swarms of insects, the dead fish along the shores, and even the devastating earthquake, many people hoped the sequence of unusual events had finally reached its end. But another strange sign began to appear, this time in the water. In several regions, residents started noticing something unusual about nearby lakes and reservoirs. At first, it was only a faint change in color. The water that normally appeared clear or deep blue began shifting into darker shades. Then, the colors grew more intense. Some lakes began turning deep red, while others appeared dark green, bright turquoise, or even blackish in tone. From a distance, the water looked almost unnatural, as if paint had been poured across the surface. People gathered along the shores to look at the strange transformation. Videos and photos quickly spread across social media, showing entire bodies of water glowing with unusual colors beneath the sunlight. In some places, the water looked thick and murky. In others, it shimmered with a reddish tone that many residents found unsettling. It looked like the lake had changed overnight, one resident said while filming the strange scene. "I've lived here my whole life, and never seen the water look like this." Scientists say that lakes can sometimes change color due to natural causes. One of the most common reasons is the sudden growth of algae or microorganisms that thrive when environmental conditions shift. Heavy rainfall, flooding, rising temperatures, or changes in nutrients can trigger rapid blooms that dramatically alter the appearance of water. In other cases, minerals or sediments carried by floodwaters can mix into lakes and reservoirs, changing the color temporarily. But for many residents who had already witnessed weeks of strange events, the sight raised deeper questions. First came the violent storms in the sky, then the floods that swallowed streets and fields. Insects filled the air, fish died along the coast, birds fell near ancient ruins, strange lights appeared in the sky before the earthquake, and buildings collapsed as the ground shook. Now even the water itself seemed to be changing. For some people, the sequence felt too unusual to ignore. In the Bible, dramatic changes in nature are sometimes described as signs accompanying moments of great upheaval. One well-known passage from the book of Revelation speaks about waters changing in a striking way. A third of the sea turned into blood. Revelation 8:8. Throughout history, verses like this have often been interpreted symbolically. Yet when people stand before a lake that has suddenly turned deep red, the imagery can feel strangely familiar. Of course, scientists continue studying the environmental causes behind these changes. In many cases, the explanations involve natural ecological shifts following extreme weather or geological disturbances. But the timing of the events left many residents unsettled. "It's not just one thing," one local observer said, while looking across the red-tinted water. "It's everything happening one after another. Storms, floods, strange creatures appearing in the air and sea, lights in the sky, earthquakes shaking the ground, and now the water itself changing color." Each event alone might have a scientific explanation, but when they appear close together, they create a feeling that something unusual is unfolding in the natural world. For many people watching these events, one quiet question continues to linger. Have all these signs finally reached their end, or are they only the beginning of something far greater still? Looking back at everything that unfolded, the sequence of events feels almost impossible to ignore. It began with an unusual hailstorm in the middle of winter, when chunks of ice suddenly fell from the sky. Soon after, the weather intensified into violent storms filled with thunder and lightning, tearing across the clouds with incredible force. Then came the floods. Days of relentless rain overwhelmed cities and villages, turning roads into rivers and trapping families inside their homes. Crops were destroyed, livestock was lost, and entire communities were forced to wait for rescue as the water continued rising. Just when the land began to recover, strange swarms of insects appeared, filling the air in massive numbers. Along the coastline, fishermen began discovering large numbers of dead fish washing onto the shore, forcing local authorities to step in and clear the beaches. At the same time, attention turned to an ancient place, long known as the Gate of Hell, where birds flying across the area mysteriously fell from the sky, a phenomenon scientists believe may be linked to toxic gases rising from the blind Earth. Soon after, strange flashes of light appeared in the sky shortly before a powerful earthquake struck, shaking buildings and leaving destruction in its wake. And finally, in the aftermath of these disasters, several lakes began changing color, turning deep red, green, or dark black, leaving residents staring at waters that looked completely unfamiliar. Individually, Each of these events may have scientific explanations. Storm systems can produce hail, floods can follow heavy rain, insects can multiply after wet conditions, fish die when ecosystems change, strange lights may appear before earthquakes, and lakes can change color due to environmental shifts. But when so many unusual signs appear within such a short period of time, it naturally leads people to wonder, are these simply isolated natural events? Or could they be signals that something larger is happening within the Earth itself? History has shown that nature often speaks through powerful moments like these, moments that remind humanity just how fragile our world can be. If you found this story interesting, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe these events are only natural disasters, or could they be part of something much bigger?
Scientists often tell us that climate change will unfold over many decades. But Edgar Cayce, the man who accurately foresaw the Wall Street disaster and even warned of the last World War, described something far more sudden. He said the map of Europe, the United States, could change in the twinkling of an eye, triggered by a dramatic shift of the Earth's poles. According to Cayce, geography does not fracture randomly. He suggested that the Earth responds to the moral weight carried by nations themselves. The pressure of human greed, he believed, eventually bends the balance of nature. Cayce called this mysterious force national karma. It's March 2026, and nearly 90 years ago, Edgar Cayce spoke about a moment when the world would begin to shift in ways people had long dismissed as impossible. Many believed that around this time, more individuals would start questioning the reality they had always accepted, slowly becoming aware of truths that had remained hidden for generations. What makes this moment especially fascinating is a little-known document recorded in 1934. During one of his deep trance sessions, Cayce didn't simply describe the future the way many expected. Instead, what emerged from the session was written down like a strange kind of medical record, not for a person, but for the Earth itself. And what it revealed completely clashes with the reality we think we live in today. But before we go deeper, and trust me, once we cross the next few minutes, you may never look at reality the same way again. Take a second right now to like this video, subscribe and share it with someone who you know has been feeling that something is off lately. Because once this starts making sense, you're going to want people around you who understand it too. And if this channel resonates with you, consider becoming a member. And later in the video, you can also support the research with a super thanks and even hype the video using the hype option. Now, stay with me. Let me take you back to the early 1930s. The world was entering a time of uncertainty. Economic collapse had shaken nations, societies were struggling to recover, and beneath the surface many people felt a quiet but growing unease. It was during this period that a man known as the Sleeping Prophet, Edgar Cayce, recorded something unusual. Cayce was not a politician or a scientist. He was a quiet man from Kentucky who became known for entering deep trance states and dictating thousands of readings that were carefully written down by stenographers. These transcripts, later archived by the Association for Research and Enlightenment, covered everything from health remedies to historical mysteries. But among the thousands of readings, one document stood out for a different reason. In Reading 3967, Cayce described what he called a kind of collective condition affecting humanity. It was not a virus, not a disease doctors could diagnose, but something deeper. He spoke of a growing state of collective unrest, a psychological and spiritual disturbance spreading quietly among populations. According to the notes taken during the trance, Cayce described it almost like a planetary illness, a condition emerging as people began reacting to changes occurring across the Earth itself. The transcript explained that strange environmental shifts, social tensions and sudden upheavals would begin to appear at the same time. Storms would intensify, the ground itself would seem unsettled, and nations would experience waves of anxiety and instability. But the most striking part of the reading focused on one particular nation. Casey said the symptoms would be felt especially strongly in the United States. In the transcript, he referred to this phenomenon as a form of national karma. In his view, a nation could accumulate the consequences of its collective actions over generations, just as individuals accumulate personal karma. When that weight reached a certain point, the result would not necessarily appear as punishment, but as a deep internal imbalance. The record describes people feeling restless without fully understanding why. Institutions would be questioned. Social trust would weaken. Many would experience a sense that something fundamental in the world was shifting, even if they could not explain it logically. Casey suggested that this collective unease would not come from a single event. Instead, it would build gradually as people witnessed unusual patterns unfolding around them. Environmental disturbances, political conflict, and sudden global crises appearing closer together in time. According to the reading, these were the symptoms of the Earth itself passing through a difficult phase, and humanity responding to it emotionally and spiritually. The document did not give a precise date, nor did it claim the process would happen all at once. Instead, the notes describe it as a period of awakening through instability, when societies would be forced to confront deeper questions about their direction, their values, and their relationship with the planet. For Casey, the condition he described was not simply a warning, it was also a diagnosis. My friend, in just the past few weeks, something has been unfolding across the United States that many people cannot ignore anymore. Not a single event, not one isolated disaster, but a sequence of disturbances that appeared almost one after another. If this message is resonating with you right now, if you feel that something unusual is happening in the world around us, take a moment to support the message so more people can hear it. Not for attention, not for popularity, but because there are millions of people scrolling through their phones every day without realizing how many strange events are happening right in front of them. Now, listen carefully to what has been happening. First, the Northeast was struck by a snowstorm unlike anything recorded in modern history. In New York, entire neighborhoods were buried under layers of snow that arrived faster than crews could clear the roads. Cars disappeared beneath white drifts. Airports shut down. Streets that are normally alive with traffic turned silent as the storm overwhelmed the city. Meteorologists struggled to describe the scale of it, calling it one of the most intense winter events the region had ever faced. At nearly the same time, on the opposite side of the country, California was experiencing the complete opposite extreme. Massive storms brought relentless rain that poured into rivers and reservoirs already under pressure. Entire towns faced rising waters as flood warnings spread across the state. Highways closed. Communities watched as water crept closer to homes and farmland. For many residents, the flooding came on top of an already difficult period marked by rising living costs, housing struggles, and economic pressure. What unsettled people was not just the disasters themselves, but the timing. Severe winter conditions in one region, historic flooding in another, both dominating headlines at the same moment. And then, as if the sky itself added another layer to the story, a blood moon appeared over the country. Late at night, people across the United States looked up and saw the moon slowly turn a deep red color during a lunar eclipse. From rural towns to major cities, the cameras captured the same eerie sight glowing above the clouds. Social media filled with images from different states showing the same crimson moon hanging over the horizon. Some people saw it simply as a beautiful astronomical event. Others said the timing felt strange, appearing during a period when the nation was already watching storms, floods, and disruptions unfold. Meteorologists, astronomers, and scientists each gave their explanations. Storm systems follow patterns. Flooding can be traced to atmospheric rivers. A blood moon is a natural result of the Earth's shadow crossing the moon. But for many observers, the real question was not whether each event had a scientific explanation. The question was why so many powerful events seemed to be appearing at the same time.